Imagine standing at the edge of a field, the morning fog still clinging to the earth, and out of that mist emerge figures unlike anything you have ever seen. Towering men, their hair slicked into rigid spikes with lime paste, their naked bodies painted and tattooed with spiraling blue-black designs that twist across their skin like living serpents. They are screaming, not the panicked screams of men afraid to die, but something deeper, something that reaches into the primitive corners of your brain and tells you to run. You are looking at Celtic warriors, and before this day is over, you will understand why even the armies of Rome feared them. The Celts were not a single nation. They were a vast cultural web that stretched across most of Europe for over 1,000 years, from the British Isles and Iberia in the west to Anatolia in the east. They did not call themselves Celts. That name was given to them by the Greeks, who used the word Keltoi to describe these strange, fierce peoples they encountered on the edges of the known world. But whatever you called them, whoever was unlucky enough to face them in battle remembered the encounter for the rest of their lives, assuming they survived. What made the Celtic warrior so terrifying began long before a single weapon was raised. It began with appearance. The Romans who documented their first encounters with Celtic fighters wrote with a mixture of contempt and barely concealed awe. These men were physically imposing by the standards of the ancient world, tall, broad, often fair-haired. But it was what they did to themselves before battle that made them something otherworldly. The lime paste that stiffened their hair was not decorative. It was a declaration. It transformed a man's head into something that resembled the mane of a creature, wild, unnatural, defiant of nature itself. When a warrior tilted his head back and screamed his war cry, those jagged spikes would frame his face like the crown of a war god. Then there was the woad. This dark blue dye, extracted from a plant that grew in abundance across the British Isles, was pressed into the skin in elaborate patterns. The exact purpose has been debated for centuries. Some historians believe the designs held spiritual meaning, connecting the warrior to ancestral spirits or divine protection. Others argue they served a more practical psychological function, to make the warrior look less like a man and more like a demon. Both explanations may be true, because for the Celts, there was no real separation between the spiritual and the practical. Everything was sacred, everything was power. Some Celtic warriors went even further. They fought naked, completely naked, in some accounts, wearing nothing but a torque around their throat, that twisted band of gold or silver that served as a symbol of warrior status, and carrying their weapons. To a Roman soldier armored in iron and leather, ordered into rigid formation and drilled for months in coordinated movement, this must have seemed like madness. And that was precisely the point. The Celts understood something about human psychology that many modern military strategists still acknowledge. When your enemy appears to have abandoned the fear of death entirely, when he charges toward you stripped of all protection and screaming like something from a nightmare, a part of your mind stops calculating tactics and starts simply trying to survive. The weapons themselves were extraordinary. The Celtic longsword, known as the Latin sword after the archaeological culture that produced it, was one of the most advanced iron weapons in the ancient world. It was long, sometimes approaching a meter in length, and designed not for thrusting, but for sweeping cuts. A warrior wielding one did not fight with the precise, economical movements of a Roman legionary. He fought in great arcing swings, using the full weight and length of the blade to cleave through whatever stood before him. The sound of that blade in motion, the whistle of iron through air before it connected, was itself a kind of weapon. They carried shields, too, but Celtic shields tell a story that is easy to overlook. Unlike the heavy, body-length scutum of Roman infantry, many Celtic shields were relatively lightweight, often made of wood with a central iron boss and decorated with elaborate metalwork. Some of the most beautiful objects ever recovered from the ancient world are Celtic shields. The Battersea Shield, pulled from the Thames River in London, is covered in intricate swirling patterns of Latin art, inlaid with red enamel. It is almost too beautiful to have been used in combat. And here is where the myth and the reality of the Celtic warriors start to blur in fascinating ways. Many of those decorative shields were likely ceremonial, objects of status and ritual rather than battlefield equipment. This tells us something important. The Celts were not simply brutes. They were a deeply artistic people, and their art was inseparable from their identity as warriors. The swirling knotwork and animal motifs that covered their weapons, shields, jewelry, and bodies were not decoration for decoration's sake. They were maps of a spiritual universe, symbols of the natural forces these warriors believed flowed through them in battle. A sword was not just a tool for killing. It was a sacred object, sometimes given a name, sometimes thrown into a river as an offering to the gods when its owner died. And those gods were everywhere. The Celtic religious world was dense and immediate, populated by hundreds of deities who inhabited rivers, mountains, groves, and springs. The Druids, the priestly class who served as the keepers of this sacred knowledge, held enormous power in Celtic society. They were not simply priests in the way we might imagine. They were lawyers, judges, historians, scientists, and intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. And before a major battle, they were indispensable. Druidic rituals before combat could involve animal sacrifice, prophetic divination, the recitation of long genealogical poems designed to channel the power of ancestors into the warriors standing in the field. In some accounts, human sacrifice was performed at times of greatest crisis. A prisoner or condemned criminal offered to the gods in exchange for victory. The Romans used descriptions of these rituals as propaganda to justify their conquest of Gaul and Britain, and we should be cautious about taking Roman accounts at face value. But there is enough archaeological evidence to suggest that ritual killing did occur in certain contexts, and that the boundary between religion and warfare in Celtic culture was essentially non-existent. The Druids also controlled something that was perhaps more powerful than any weapon: knowledge. All Druidic learning was passed down orally. Nothing was written. A Druid could spend 20 years memorizing the accumulated mythology, law, genealogy, and natural philosophy of their people. This was not a limitation, it was a choice. Writing things down made knowledge accessible to enemies. Keeping it locked inside trained human minds made it impossible to steal. And in battle, a Druid who knew the weakness of the enemy's gods, who could curse their water sources, who could read the flight of birds to determine the right moment to charge, that Druid was worth 100 swordsmen. Of course, Celtic warfare was not purely spiritual. It was also intensely personal, and the social structure of Celtic warrior culture shaped the way battles were fought in ways that often confused and frustrated their enemies. Celtic society was organized around the concept of honor in a way that was absolute and consuming. A warrior's status was determined by his deeds, his bravery, his generosity, and his loyalty. Cowardice was arguably the worst thing a Celtic man could be accused of, and the shame of it could follow a family for generations. This created fighters who were genuinely, functionally, terrifyingly fearless. Not because they wanted to die, but because the social cost of appearing afraid was worse than death. This honor culture produced one of the most remarkable and misunderstood features of Celtic warfare: the single combat challenge. Before large engagements, it was common practice for the greatest warrior on one side to step forward, recite his lineage and achievements, sometimes at considerable length, and challenge the enemy's best man to meet him in individual combat. This was not theater. Well, it was theater, but it was theater with very real consequences. The outcome of a single combat could shift the morale of an entire army. It could, in some negotiations, even decide the outcome of a conflict without a larger battle. And the poetry of it mattered. A Celtic warrior who could not compose and deliver a boasting speech before combat was considered lesser than one who could. The sword and the word were equally important. The Romans found this baffling. Roman military doctrine was built on discipline, formation, collective action. The idea of stopping an army to let two men fight each other was, to them, a kind of romantic absurdity. But it was also something the Romans occasionally had to engage with. There are accounts of Roman officers accepting Celtic challenges in single combat, sometimes to disastrous results. The Celtic warrior class trained for individual combat with an intensity that their Roman counterparts rarely matched. A Roman centurion was excellent at coordinating his unit. A Celtic champion was excellent at killing the man standing directly in front of him, and probably the next man, and the one after that. This brings us to one of the great confrontations of the ancient world, the encounters between the Celts and Rome that shaped both civilizations. In 390 BCE, or thereabouts, the date is debated. A force of Celts from northern Italy, a people the Romans called the Gauls, descended south and did something that no foreign enemy had managed in centuries. They destroyed a Roman army at the Battle of the Allia, and then they marched into Rome itself. They sacked the city. They burned much of it. And by some accounts, they sat in the forum on golden thrones while trembling Roman senators tried to negotiate with them as though they were gods who had descended to claim what was theirs. The Romans never forgot this. For generations afterward, the phrase Gallic terror, the tumultus Gallicus, was used to describe a state of existential emergency. It was the only situation in which Roman law was suspended and absolute emergency powers were granted. The Celts had burned themselves into the Roman psyche as the ultimate threat, the dark force at the edge of civilization. And when Julius Caesar launched his campaigns in Gaul in 58 BCE, beginning a brutal 8-year war that he described in his own writings, that ancient fear was still present. Caesar was fighting ghosts as much as people. Caesar's account of the Gallic Wars, the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, is one of our richest sources on Celtic warriors, and one of the most compromised. Caesar was brilliant, ruthless, and writing propaganda. He needed to justify a war he had launched largely for personal, political, and financial gain. So the Gauls in his account are simultaneously noble and barbaric, courageous and childlike, worthy opponents for the great Caesar to overcome. We see them through a lens polished specifically to make Caesar look good. But even through that distortion, the individual warriors shine. Men like Vercingetorix, the Arvernian chieftain who united the fractious Gallic tribes into a single resistance movement and came closer to stopping Caesar than almost any other enemy the Roman general faced. Vercingetorix was a military strategist of genuine genius. His scorched earth policy, his guerrilla tactics, his ability to inspire loyalty across tribal lines that had kept the Gauls divided for generations, all speak to a commander who understood both warfare and politics. He lost, ultimately. He surrendered himself to Caesar at Alesia, riding out of the fortress alone, fully armed, and dismounting before the Roman general to throw his weapons at Caesar's feet. It was a final, defiant act of theater, a last assertion of warrior dignity in defeat. Caesar threw him in a dungeon for 6 years and then had him strangled during his triumph in Rome. The story of Vercingetorix is the story of Celtic civilization itself, magnificent, defiant, and eventually ground under by a force that valued organization over individual valor. But the story did not end in Gaul. In Britain, Celtic resistance to Roman occupation continued for generations. Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe, led a revolt in 60 or 61 CE that was, for a period of terrifying weeks, genuinely close to destroying the Roman province of Britannia entirely. Her forces, which included warriors from multiple tribes, sacked and burned 3 of the largest Roman cities in Britain, Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium. The archaeological evidence for this destruction is still visible in the form of a thick red layer of burnt debris under modern London, sometimes called the Boudican destruction horizon. She killed somewhere between 70 and 80,000 people. Roman citizens, allies, collaborators, all of them. It was not a skirmish. It was a catastrophe. The Romans ultimately defeated her at a battle whose location remains unknown, and Boudica died, by poison, by illness, or by her own hand, depending on which source you believe. But the fact that a Celtic queen, in a culture that was perfectly capable of placing women in positions of military and political leadership, nearly toppled a Roman province tells you something that is often glossed over in popular history. Celtic society, for all its violence, was in some ways more egalitarian than the civilizations that conquered it. Women could own property, inherit leadership, and in some tribes take part in warfare. The Romans, who kept their women firmly confined to domestic life, found this utterly incomprehensible. There is a danger, when we talk about Celtic warriors, of sliding into romanticization. The Celts were not noble savages living in perfect harmony with nature before the corruption of Rome. They raided each other's cattle and villages. They practiced slavery. They conducted bloody feuds that could span generations. Their society was hierarchical and violent in ways that caused real suffering for real people. The head cult, the practice of taking, displaying, and sometimes preserving the severed heads of enemies, was real and widespread. Celtic warriors would hang heads from their horses' necks, display them on the walls of their strongholds, even preserved them in cedar oil as trophies to be shown to guests. To the Celtic warrior, the head was the seat of the soul, and possessing an enemy's head meant possessing something of their power. But here is what is true and what endures. The Celtic warrior tradition produced some of the most extraordinary human beings the ancient world ever saw. Individuals of almost supernatural physical courage, trained from childhood in combat and in the spiritual disciplines that made them genuinely unafraid of death. Poets and killers simultaneously. People for whom beauty and violence were not opposites, but expressions of the same fundamental reality. They look at us from across 2,500 years of history, from the pages of hostile Roman accounts and the gleaming surfaces of their own incomparable metalwork, and they are still astonishing. The world they fought to protect is gone. The languages most of them spoke have either vanished entirely or survived only in corners. In the Welsh of mountain villages, in the Irish of Atlantic coasts, in the Gaelic of Scottish islands swept by cold northern wind. The Druids and their 20 years of memorized knowledge went with them, irretrievably lost. The names of most of the warriors who stood on those fog-covered fields and screamed into the face of empire were never written down, because writing things down was not how they kept the sacred fire alive. But the fire never entirely went out. Every time a storyteller in Ireland begins a tale that has been passed down for 100 generations, every time an archaeologist pulls a sword from a river and holds it up to the light, every time someone looks at the spiraling patterns on a piece of Latin metalwork and feels something they cannot quite name, something old, something fierce, something beautiful, the Celtic warrior is still there, still screaming, still unafraid, and still, in some way that matters more than we can easily explain, absolutely and completely alive.